Welcome back to The World Today. Two prominent humanitarian agencies say they believe Syria's neighbors are sharply reducing the number of refugees that they allow to enter countries. According to reports, not fewer than 18,500 refugees fled Syria in October. The NGOs accused the international community of a total collapse of solidarity. More than 3 million people have fled Syria since the conflict began in 2011, with millions more internally displaced. A joint report by the Norwegian Refugee Council and the International Rescue Committee said many civilians who wanted to flee have now been trapped in Syria. World leaders are in Myanmar for a day of talks on regional as well as international issues. The East Asia Summit brings together the 10 ASEAN nations and the United States, Russia, Japan, China, South Korea, Russia also, and India and Australia and New Zealand. In the meantime, U.S. President Barack Obama says he's confident about the political change process in Myanmar. His comments come hours after he accused Myanmar's government of backsliding on reforms. He's expected to hold talks with the president, Thein Sein, to push for changes to the apartheid-like living conditions of the country's ethnic Rohingya minority, as well as democratic reform.
U.S. President Barack Obama and leaders of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations convened for the second ever summit on Thursday, with the former hoping to build a stronger strategic partnership with the region on economic, social and security issues. The meeting allowed the U.S. leader to consult closely with his Southeast Asian counterparts, while he emphasized ASEAN as the heart of Asia's rapid growth.
I'm looking forward to continuing to build on the strong partnership between ASEAN and the United States that already exists.
Meanwhile, after talks with lawmakers in the capital, President Obama said he is optimistic about political change in Myanmar, but that more work is needed to push forward with reforms. Myanmar emerged from international pariah status when a semi-civilian government took power 4 years ago and initiated a wave of liberal change after nearly half a century of military rule.
It was an excellent discussion about this transition process that's taking place here in Myanmar around consolidating some of the gains that have already been made, but also pushing further to institute a genuine democracy here in this country that can serve the needs of all people. I've been very impressed by not only the quality of members of Parliament, but also their determination to move forward.
Among the group was opposition leader and Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, who is not eligible to become president under the existing constitution. Obama will meet Suu Kyi again on Friday at her home in Myanmar's largest city, Yangon. She and other politicians made no comment after the meeting.
Well, Margaret has rejoined us from New York, the VOA Bureau Office in New York. Margaret, thank you. I do hope that, well, somehow the internet will help us keep you on the air for a while. So let's continue now with what the special briefing was on the Ebola virus disease at the UN headquarters today.
Right, well, the General Assembly heard some good news and some bad news. The good news is, as you mentioned earlier, infections are down in Liberia. We heard that there are about 150 a week now, which is really a significant improvement because Liberia has really been the hardest hit country. Unfortunately, Sierra Leone is having a much harder time combating the virus. In Guinea, things seem to be a bit level. We also heard that people are improving safe burial practices, and this is one of the biggest reasons they attribute the improvement to, that people are protecting themselves and not touching bodies and not washing bodies when they bury them. So there's safe burials and burial teams who can reach people. There's also one of the most important things that Mr. Bamberry and Dr. Navarro mentioned is that community involvement and community engagement is really increasing, and people are learning about the virus, the facts about it rather than the rumors and things that were spreading in the beginning, and people are knowing and understanding what they need to do to protect themselves and keep themselves from getting infected. There was also some sad news. UNICEF says there are about 3,300 orphans out of the crisis in West Africa, and this was particularly sad, I thought. And we're hearing that schools still remain closed in the region as they're trying to protect people from transmission. So children are out of school.
So encouraging news from Liberia and Guinea, but Sierra Leone, we understand they've recorded new cases in the past 1 week.
Yeah.
Why the sudden change? I mean, why the change in figures for Sierra Leone? Why do they think, they've had more new cases of the Ebola virus disease being recorded in the country?
I think the main issue is that they need to get out to remote areas, and that seems to be one of the problems they've been having, that they've been establishing more Ebola treatment units, but they're not in the numbers that they need. So one of the things that the UN is looking at with their partners and with these countries is, instead of establishing big treatment units with 100 or more beds in a few places, they may establish smaller units with 20 or 30 beds, but in more places. So that way you reach more people. But the other issue is that there's not enough personnel, trained personnel. You need to be trained really to deal with this. You can't just go in and volunteer. So they need trained personnel on the ground. But I think one of the reasons we're seeing an improvement, for instance, in Liberia, is that the international response is really starting to ramp up now. We had promises and pledges, but units are being built, treatment units are being built, people are on the ground now, trained healthcare workers. So this is starting to pay off. Because don't forget, the incubation period for the disease is 21 days. So you would see like a little, pause between when the people arrived, when the healthcare workers arrived and the treatment units went online, and when we would see a decrease in cases. So I think that's what we're starting to experience now, is the effect of the better treatment for Ebola.
And how optimistic should we be about the clinical trials that Médecins Sans Frontières is already advocating? We understand they'll be starting as soon as next month, and results expected sometime in February. What are the odds? I mean, what are the possibilities of
Well, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know what the
Ebola
odds are,
virus?
but, we've seen, for instance, one of the things they're looking at is using the blood of survivors of Ebola, using the blood and plasma from these people to inject in people who have it, so to boost their immune system. And since they have an antibody once they survive it, perhaps their blood will pass it on to somebody who has it. And we've seen that here in the United States. There were some doctors who got sick in West Africa and came back here and were treated with experimental drugs and were cured. And they've actually donated their blood to other people who've had Ebola here. And so far, of the, I think, 8 cases we've had in the United States, only 1 person has died. So maybe that's promising in and of itself. But I think it's too early to see. We have to see what the science tells us. But the fact that they can do the trials so quickly, and that we would see by February, that's just a few months away. So that would help this current crisis, I think, help. It would be soon enough for the people who are suffering now.
That has to be good news, and it really has to work. Fingers crossed. Thank you so much, Margaret Bashir. A great point there you made with Sierra Leone, saying that more treatment centers need to be built in the remote areas. We do know the British government has been very supportive of the Sierra Leonean government, providing centers all across the Sierra Leonean capital. But as Margaret said, there more needs to be done in the remote areas.